Steve is remote again, council, and administration is aware. Okay, good evening. It's 5 o'clock. I will now call to order the continuation of our budget workshop for 2025. Councillor Newkirk is with us, but he is remotely again this evening. We will begin with our presentation of the library shortly. So a couple of quick comments. We are here from 5 till 9 tonight. We got a lot of progress done yesterday. If we can't get done tonight, that'd be great, rather than coming back on a Friday night, if we can avoid that. But I will not limit debate to make that happen, but I will ask council, you can say in 10 words instead of 50, let's use 10, shall we? And move things along quickly instead of, if anybody starts to ramble, I will interject, not disrespectfully, but I want to keep things moving tonight and try and get done tonight. So please keep your comments and questions succinct as best we can, and answers from administration also succinctly would be much appreciated. And we'll move along as best we can. So Madam Clerk, we can begin with our agenda with our presentation from the library, if we can. Would you please join us at the table? And I'll get your microphone going and we can begin. Oh, hang on, it wasn't mic number 5. Nope, there it is. Please introduce yourselves and begin your presentation. Thank you.
Perfect. Hi, Aruna Brennan, Chair of the City of Beaumont Library Board.
And I'm Laura Winton, the Director of the Beaumont Library.
So hello, Mayor Daniluk and Council, and thank you for the opportunity to present the library's 2025 budget request. The Beaumont's library's aspiration is to be a place for everyone to gather, explore, learn, and express themselves. Click it for it. We accomplish that vision by connecting people to ideas, experiences, and to one another, using our programming, collections, space, technology, and of course, staff. Vision and mission align with the City of Beaumont's strategic plan. The library's current strategic plan is heavily informed by Council's priority for the city. The library supports economic prosperity and sustainability of our community by providing resources for community members to start businesses, upgrade skills, and learn about career options. We also know that businesses choose to locate in communities with libraries because they understand that libraries are essential quality of life enhancement for their employees and family. We know connection is a key factor in supporting individual and community health. Our library supports the health of our growing population through our mission of connection. Our goal is always to bring people together through our programs, outreach, and by providing a welcoming gathering space for the community, not to mention access to current evidence-based health information and the staff skills to help community members navigate misinformation and disinformation. The library is a safe, inclusive space for all community members. Our programming supports literacy for people of all ages and includes English language learning for Beaumont's growing newcomer community. We are deeply committed to removing barriers to access, so library membership, programming, and resources are all free to access. Of key importance, the library offers free access to computers and the internet, and this is essential to ensuring equity and inclusivity so that all community members can participate fully in our modern world. Finally, the library empowers citizens to connect and collaborate in their communities and the world by helping people find evidence-based resources that are credible and reliable. This goes beyond having materials on our shelves. Our staff offer unbiased expert assistance in navigating the information world.
So what does that all look like in practice and by the numbers? In the next few slides, I'll provide an update on our key performance indicators to date in 2024 and trends in terms of service demand at the library and how we're responding to those demands. First up, we have our programming. Library staff has offered 526 programs to 7,165 community members to date in 2024. As you may remember from an earlier presentation, the library has been struggling to meet the demand for programming from our growing community. We were responding by offering more programs, but this approach had really stretched staff capacity to its limit, and we decided it was neither sustainable nor efficient. So this year we focused on assessing high demand program times, and we adjusted program schedules to meet service demand as best we can while maximizing participation in each program offered. The result has been a decrease in the overall number of programs offered, but an increase in the average number of participants in each program. In 2025, we'll be undertaking a community programming gaps analysis to better understand the demand from various demographic groups in Beaumont for programming, how well the community is serving those populations as a whole, and where there are gaps the library is best suited to fill. We will continue to approach this work with an eye to partnerships. The library's collections are a key service to the community. As you know, we've been in the process of expanding our undersized collection for the past 3 years, and we're proud to now offer over 32,000 books, DVDs, CDs, and as of August, and thanks to Council, video games. Since we began expanding our collections, an exciting trend has emerged. The number of items we're bringing in from other libraries in the province has been steadily decreasing, while our overall circulation has been increasing significantly. So what this means is that Beaumontonians are finding the materials that they want and the resources that they want on our shelves, and they're not having to wait to bring things in from other libraries across the province. I think it's easy to overlook the impact that our collections have on community members. But if we break it down into economic terms, based on the average cost of item in the library's collection and our borrowing to date in 2024, investment in the library has saved Beaumontonians over $3.6 million in material borrowing alone. And that number doesn't include borrowing of e-resources. So we think that's a pretty impressive return on investment. Finally, a quick note on visits and users. We've had over 57,000 visits to the library so far in 2024, and we are on track to exceed 2023 visits by about 7% or 5,000 visits. Our number of active cardholders continues to climb, with over 4,000 households in Beaumont having an active library card. Last year, I reported 47% of households have active cards, and I'm proud to say that we've passed that 50% threshold, and we can now say that 53% of households in Beaumont have active library cards.
The library has had a busy year, and we're planning for an even busier year in 2025. The library board spent the fall of 2024 preparing a 2025 operating budget designed to support community demand and council's strategic goals. Our 2025 budget was developed with 3 priorities in mind. The first priority, and the source of the required operating budget increase, is the impact of a new salary grid that will allow us to offer competitive compensation to library staff. Our second priority is to maintain current service levels despite some necessary cuts to mitigate the impact of priority 1. And finally, we will complete our community gathering space project using capital funds and absorb the operational impacts of the change. The 2025 budget includes an increase of nearly $130,000 to our salaries and benefit costs without adding any new positions. So what happened there? Last year, the library hired an independent consultant to conduct a compensation review. The library had not had a compensation policy or had their wages reviewed in the last 15 years to the best of our knowledge. What we found was that the library staff were making between 24% to 36% less than staff working for relevant local and regional competitors. We were seeing that impact of this in our recruiting efforts. The library board adopted a new compensation policy and a new wage grid that we implemented in 2024. The 2024 impact of the new grid was $34,000, which we funded from our reserves. In 2025, we need to incorporate the new salary grid in our operating budget, leading to our requested increase. The major priority for our 2025 budget was to accommodate the large increase to our salaries and benefits line while finding efficiencies to mitigate the impact, while allowing us to maintain services at the 2024 levels. The result is a required total operating budget of $1,458,600, and we're asking the city to contribute $1,304,100 in operating funds, which is an increase in local appropriation of $93,400 or 7.7%. We worked hard to find efficiencies while managing the impact of the increased cost across our expenses. As you can see, we have reduced our collections budget and programming budget by a total of $59,000. We are confident that we can continue to offer exceptional library services with this operational budget.
Before we move on to our capital carry forward request, just a quick slide showing the per capita cost of library services over the past 10 years compared to the per capita cost if funding had matched inflation. When we talk about per capita costs, we're looking at how much the library is costing the city per community member. The blue line shows actual per capita funding for library services based on the grant we received from the city. The green line shows what library funding per capita would have been if it had risen to meet inflation. The library's per capita funding fell below inflation during the pandemic, and we've been playing some catch up since then, and this year's operating budget request continues to see us slightly above inflation. Finally, the library is requesting a carry forward of the $210,000 in city capital funds that council generously approved for the library's community gathering spaces project. As you know, we've had some delays securing full funding for this project, so we weren't able to move forward with design until this past summer. We've now completed design and procurement is underway. So we will complete this project in May or June of 2025, depending on the lead times required for furniture and fixtures.
On behalf of the library board and staff, I want to thank council for the opportunity to present on the library's work and share our 2025 operating budget and capital carry forward requests. As always, we're so grateful for the support of council and city administration, and we're excited to continue to offer Beaumontonians opportunities to explore, discover, and connect in 2025. And Laura and I are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate it. From the library, pardon me. Councilor McCook, you have the floor, Kat.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you very much for coming. As always, appreciate the update from the library, and 53% households now have active library cards. That is very impressive and just shows how much that if the usage is there, then people will use it. So just one question. What would the impact be if you're not able to receive this funding?
Yeah, so if we don't receive this funding, there's really only two pots that we can pull money from. It's collections and programming, and staffing in general. So we would be looking at pulling back further collections budgets, further reducing our programming budget, and likely looking at a reduction in service hours to bring down that staffing cost.
Thank you for that clarity.
Thanks, Kat. Appreciate that. Any other questions from members of council on the library presentation? We'll get to the library later on the operating budget later this evening, but as part of our discussion on the operating. Oh, Sam, pardon me, Councilor McGough-Swain. Sam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Bill. Mr. Mayor.
It's okay.
Thank you again. I have the privilege to sit on the library board. I'll wear my council hat today, but just thank you for everything that you guys both do as well, and everyone else on the board. You can see the impact that it has on our community. I think, as Bill mentioned, we'll get to the operating ask later in our budget. Just wanted to speak to the capital side of things here. Maybe, obviously, you've gone through this to change the space and make it more inviting. Maybe to speak to two things. One's a bit of a layup here. The library is still looking for a new space. So part A, just maybe could you just speak to a bit about that, what that new space ask would, maybe not the ask, but the need for one. Mm-hmm. And two, the additional capital that you're putting into this, the transferableness, if that's a word, mm-hmm. into a potential new space down the road. Could you just speak to those two things?
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody knows that Beaumont is growing at just exponential rates here, and the library is struggling with not having enough space now. So we're almost at a third the size we should be for the size of our population. We are at 8,000 square feet in the library, and we should be, closing in on like 30,000. So we are very, very small to serve the population. We see that impact in programming. We just don't have the space to offer to meet the programming demand that we're seeing. We see it study spaces and gathering spaces, so people want to rent rooms, and we just don't have the ability to offer that. And we have our very limited study spaces that are always in high demand, and our visits just keep going up and up and up. So we absolutely very badly need a new space, and I know council is working hard on that. This capital project is really a stopgap. It's a Band-Aid solution to try to maximize the use of our current space. The work that we're doing in this project, there's very little construction involved. All we're doing is removing a little bit of built-in furniture, and the rest is all furniture and fixtures, and all of that is transferable and can come with us to any new space that we might end up in.
That covers up both questions? Yes. Okay, I thought it did. Thank you. Councillor Penrod, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mayor Daniluk. Appreciate the presentation. Continuing a theme from yesterday, we love and appreciate your services. This is a very difficult budget. So we have to contemplate things that we might that wouldn't be our first choice. Question for you historically, maybe for Aruna as the board chair. Has the board contemplated library card memberships in the past? Like fees, membership fees, I should say.
We just actually removed the library fees for the cards. Like it was like a year ago or
Sorry,
something.
I'll address this one.
Yeah, sure.
We actually haven't had membership fees for our cards in my tenure, which is 5 years, and it's been a while before then. We also got rid of late fees, and the reason for all of those decisions was around accessibility and inclusivity. We know that fees for library cards are an enormous barrier, and it's not just the cost. It's, you know, a lot of libraries will do things like say, well, you know, if you can't pay, you can just let us know. That barrier of having to say, you know what, I can't pay for this card, people aren't going to do that. So we know that library membership rates drop when you implement fees. And we also know that that's true with late fees, that they are a huge barrier to access and people just stop using the library once they have those fees. So I will say in terms of best practices, there are very few libraries in Alberta now that have fees for library cards. And the trend is to get rid of overdue fees in libraries. We're seeing that spread through the province. So I would say that the library board is unlikely to contemplate going back to a model like that. We'd be more likely to pull back on our collections budgets to reduce hours than to include that barrier to service.
Thank you. Appreciate the window into those decisions.
Okay, any further questions? I think Steve has messaged me, he has no questions at this time, nor do I. Thank you for the presentation, much appreciated. It's been 5 years since you joined us, Laura. I can't believe it's been 5 years already. It's just, when you said that, I thought, yeah, it's been 5 years, but thank you for all the work you do. The community is very good because of the work you do, and it's a very good operation. So we'll get to library later this evening, so thank you for coming.
Thanks.
Appreciate that. All right, council, we'll continue on operating. So where we concluded yesterday was at the end of page 12, on page 12, we finished off total expenses. The next on the agenda there on page 12 is transfers and reserves. We'll discuss that topic, and then I know Phil has something he wants to talk about, and I have a couple of motions myself on operating, which are very short discussions, I think they will be, and we can move then into grants and into library, that part too. So having said that, can you put page 12 from the hard copy of the budget on the screen, just to refresh our memories where we're at? And Jay, just so I'm clear too, we are currently at 5.41% on our running total from yesterday's work. Can you just confirm that for me? Make sure you're at 5.41? Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I think it's, that's the one there, yes. So on transfers and reserves, there are 3 lines there. Do any questions from members of council on that part of the page 12? Went through from Jay yesterday. I have no questions personally on this section of page 12. Any questions from anybody else on council? Seeing none, we'll move right along. So Phil, sorry, Councillor Penrod, you mentioned having a discussion on franchise fees. So at this point, I'll open the floor to you for your discussion, and then we can go on to my stuff for part of operating, and we'll move along. You have the floor, Councillor Penrod.
Thank you, Mayor. Trying to take your counsel to keep it brief. In the same spirit of Councillor Monkoff-Swain's desire to look at all possibilities and kind of look at the tax split between residential, non-residential, I'm wondering if Mr. Bahachuk can pull up the 2024 franchise fees regional comparison that we mentioned yesterday and that was distributed to council yesterday by email. So in advance of our workshop, I had prepared a possible motion, but wanting to know all the data, I just wanted us to be able to see together how Beaumont compares to the 12 other EMRB member municipalities. So is that possible to bring up or no?
Your mic's on, Jay.
And just while we're waiting on that, I guess I'll just say part of my rationale for discussing franchise fees is that I know going in the community back some 5 years, there's some really passionate feelings about franchise fees, and I think that actually extends to the whole province. Residents sometimes feel that franchise fees are just a way of hiding a tax levy, and that's definitely one of the top 4 considerations municipalities tend to factor into decisions on franchise fees. One of them is to relieve the tax levy. So I just would want to say, as we have this discussion, that my desire would be, if we were to ever adjust a franchise fee upwards, that we would be really clear about what we were doing, and that it is not so much saving residents a tax, it's replacing a tax with a fee. There are some benefits to an increase to franchise fees. Those benefits being, some folks pay franchise fees that use utilities which run across city land. So council has a fiduciary responsibility to steward the assets of the community. Those includes land assets and rent on land that's being used by companies, such as franchise fees really were conceived and why they're legal in Alberta and practiced by virtually every municipality. The second major reason is that some folks that use utilities don't pay property taxes, and so franchise fees follow the principle of user pay in a municipality. And so, for example, institutions like schools, churches, some select nonprofits don't pay property tax, but they do use utilities. So this is one way that the folks using the services in the community can, in a more fair way, be responsible. And it's always, people have some capacity and ability to control the amount of utilities they use, and therefore some capacity and ability to control the amount of franchise fees that they pay. So now that we have it up there, and having said all of that, I guess I would just invite other people to comment, if any. I'm not inclined to make my motion tonight as I look at those fees. I think we are kind of on the medium to high end of our regional comparators, county and Fort Saskatchewan. So if you're hoping that we would ever get to 0 franchise fees, we're going to need Dow Chemical to set up shop here if we're going to do that. So that's all that I have to say on franchise fees tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. My screen keeps flickering. Thank you, Councillor. Members of council wishing to weigh in on the idea of franchise fees or any appetite to discuss them any further, I'll go to Councillor Monkoff-Swain. Sam, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for bringing the discussion forward. Haven't been through this conversation once. I think if it was framed the way that you framed it just then, probably would have had an easier time 4 years ago when we went through that, because I thought that was very well done and explained it well. Especially the tax for a fee, right? Like ultimately we're looking at affordability here, not a little number that says 7.7%, and you acknowledge that and you recognize that. That's why we're going to look at everything that happens in our community, not just that number. So yeah, I would say, you know, I've seen that regional comparison before. We landed on that for a reason, because it was kind of in that healthy-ish phase. So I wouldn't be in favor of raising them. I do think it's a really important conversation that that you raise here, and most residents and businesses don't necessarily recognize that that's part of council's budget process. So I appreciate you bringing it forward. I wouldn't be in favor of raising them any higher, and I don't think that's what you're suggesting. But like I said, if I could go back 4 years, that discussion, take your speech and insert it into mine, I think I would have had an easier time. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate that. I don't see Steve. Steve, is your hand up? I can't see you on screen. Do you have a question? If not, that's okay.
No, all good, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. I do appreciate it being brought up too, Councillor Penrod. It's good to have every couple of years we have this discussion about where revenues are coming from, and franchise fees are a bit of a revenue for us. At the present time, I'm not inclined to look at them. I think our franchise fees right now are reasonably competitive after the movie made a few years ago. So I'm inclined to leave them as they are right now from my personal perspective, but without having a motion to look at, I'm okay. But if you want to make a motion, you can. If you should just have the discussion and you want to leave it there, that's fine too. No one else wants to speak, so it's up to you, Councillor Penrod. You have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I don't think any motion will be required tonight, but I will say the breaking news today is that St. Up, the news source that I saw as to whether they did both electricity and natural gas or just natural gas. But these are issues that every municipality, to Councillor McCook's comment yesterday, every municipality in some way is up against these kind of financial crunches because our income sources are extremely limited and seemingly always going down. And so I think it is something to keep in mind. And so I wonder if, what I may do is work in the background on a subsequent motion. The question for tonight that I'll close with is, does administration have like a calendared schedule to revisit franchise fees and bring forward a recommendation or a discussion to council, so it's just regularly on the agenda? I'm not even suggesting how often, but the question is just, does that exist currently?
Ms. Morrison?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Penrod. Yes, that was the plan for next year, is to bring forward a report with like comparative information, what would be the impact if we made any changes in preparation for budget this year. By November 1st, we had to give notice to say we may be considering the idea, and I did do that just in case through budget deliberations here that the council would want to make a change. But if that's it, everything's staying stable at this time, and that's fine. We'll be able to inform them of that. But yes, I will be coming forward next year and with an initial report, and then can discuss if that is something you'd like to see regularly or annually through budget. But we could have that conversation at that time.
Thanks, Ms. Morrison. At this point, do you have kind of a schedule for which quarter that report would come?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Penrod, I was planning on Q2, just so that from the financial side, we can get through our year end and audit pieces of work. So Q2 was my plan. Perfect.
I don't think there will be, from my perspective, any need for a subsequent motion then. That gives us lots of time. And I think it also has the advantage in a coming election year of having the opportunity to have a very public conversation with residents around what they would like to see happen or not happen around this issue. So thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Clerk, could you put my motion on the screen regarding reserves, please? By council to make comments and potentially amendments to it, and we'll go from that point forward. So I'll move that the proposed 2025 municipal operating budget be amended by reducing the overall contribution to reserves by $283,000. I'm looking at Jay, and I know Jay's perspective on this, and let me just walk you through the logic on this. So if you join me on page 54 of the hard copy of the budget, please. I don't know what part of the agenda it is, but I'm a paper guy, so I've got page 54. This speaks to our reserves, and let me be very clear. I'm a big fan of making sure our reserves are healthy and properly funded. At the same time, we have a difficult budget in front of us, so I want to give you some brief rationale on this motion and invite you to make any comments and suggestions you may have. So we'll be contributing $4,365,000 from operating into reserves, and as you know, reserves are deposited into and reserve money taken out as the operating year goes along. My logic here is simply to, as we mentioned, having levers to possibly adjust the tax increase. This is one lever we have access to, and I suggested this amount because that's essentially 1% of the municipal tax increase, which could be reduced if this motion were to pass. My logic simply is we have 6 reserves in the green, we have 5 in the yellow. We don't know exactly until the reserve study gets back from Jay's work in the new year what the reserves actually are. So I'm balancing a small amount of risk. I think if we were to reduce the 4.3 million by 283, it's a slight risk, but I think the benefit to our taxpayer would be substantially reducing the tax levy by roughly 1%. Now, this may be an aggressive number. I'm open to any potential amendments to lower this number if this number is felt too aggressive from members of council. So if this motion were to pass, we'd go from our current 5.41% down to essentially 4.41%. If this motion were to pass. At this time, I would happy to take questions from members of council and express your thoughts on this. Again, as I mentioned, if 283 is too high, I can open to suggestions of an amendment to a lesser amount. Or, having said that myself, motion here is to open debate, discussion. I may vote against it myself, I'm not sure yet. But unless we have the motion on the floor, we can't discuss it. So it's a lever. We talk about having potential opportunities. This is one of them. And I'll entertain questions. Councillor Barnhart first, followed by Councillor Monkoff-Swain. Kathy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you for bringing this motion forward. It was on my list of things to definitely consider. I just want to make sure I've got the right number and the right page. So on page 54, you mentioned a 4-point-something million dollar figure. What, is it the total figure you're looking
Nope,
at?
it's right here.
This one?
Nope, transfer from operating, 4.3.
3, okay.
That's included in our current operating budget.
Because there's so many numbers on that page.
Yes.
Just want to make sure I was looking at the right number.
No problem.
So the 283, that number came from the calculation of what 1%
Yeah, just as
tax
simple as that.
would be. Then my question would be, which I would have asked if we, regardless of the amount that we were going to be considering to the administration, what would be the impact from your perspective? Would it be shared with Olive, or does council even get to know that, or do we need to decide that? Like, where would the money come from, which reserves, and or when would we be able to find that out?
Jay?
Through the mayor to Councillor Barnhart, we would have to take a look at what the optimal balance is for each reserve and come up with a plan, the best way to balance and smooth out the impacts while measuring against what are the other commitments that we are looking forward in the future. This all dovetails into the conversation I had yesterday about bringing a reserve policy update forward to talk about all of those pieces and smoothing and correcting them. So while the mayor is correct that I'm not crazy about reducing reserve transfers for growth for the infrastructure, this is a viable option on the table, and we would have to work with council or a recommendation to council of how that would be spread out, either through year end or through the reserve policy in the spring.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Monkoff-Swain. Sam, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it forward. Heard a lot of comments about difficult budget in front of us, and I think I've probably said that 15 times as well. My fear with this is it might help the budget here in front of us, but it makes the budgets down the road much more difficult. Right? I've always been very hesitant on reserves to take anything from that. To me, and we hear the term, and I'm sure it's going to be on everyone's pamphlets in a year, about fiscal responsibility, right? And that doesn't mean the lowest tax rate in any one given year. It's about setting up your community for longevity and financial sustainability there. And my fear with this is basically what's going to happen down the road, time value money, we're just going to have to top up more down the road. And that's going to have a longer impact. That's going to have a greater impact on our community. Like I do look at that page, and the only one is red. The only one that's red is planning, and that's kind of that's planning, right? Kendra, we've talked about this before. No offense to you, but like that's a different type of reserve, right? Like we're not talking about fleet renewal. You look in this budget, how much of our budget is actually going towards paying off through these reserves. So I'm very hesitant to touch this. I understand what you're trying to do. If I was to choose between this and maybe it's 6 in one, half and the other, I would much rather contribute less into the pay-as-you-go operating grant than take from reserves. So I'll see what others have to say. But sorry to get philosophical there early on in the budget process, but reserves, you're just pushing the problem down the line. Sorry, appreciate you bringing it forward.
Actually, I agree with you more than you might think, actually. We've had this discussion before, you and I, and council in general, but it's a lever to bring to council's attention for debate and quick and fairly brief discussion, I'm assuming. Councilor Telebus, Nathan, you have the floor on this one.
Perfect. Thank you. I align with Councillor Munkoff-Swain's comments. I know it's odd, but in saying that, I do believe, as discussed, we look at the longevity and prosperity of our community, and that's our nest egg that we're trying to build. And I just feel this would be an easy way out, sure, to get that 1% reduction. But if we want to maintain the same services next year and we don't see increased revenue, we're going to have to do the same thing. And if we want another easy way out, maybe we double up and it becomes 566. So I don't think that this is the appropriate way to try and get that discount on the tax levy.
Totally fine with your comments. Steve, Councilman Newkirk, Stephen, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just wondering, I wanted to pick up on the pay-as-you-go versus just pull from the reserve comment that Councillor Munkoff-Swain made last. If Mr. Boychuk would comment on that, please. What would the ramifications be of one versus the other, or is it all the same because it's that same whole reserve philosophy and reserve pot of money?
Jay?
Thank you. Through the mayor to the councillor. You are correct in that pay-as-you-go and reserve, and this conversation for where we are today is exactly the same. So if you're reducing pay-as-you-go or reducing the reserve contribution with the reserve policy update, I'm planning on eliminating pay-as-you-go and enrolling it into reserve. So essentially it's the same conversation, two different ways.
Okay, thank you. I figured that. I just wanted to get some clarity for everyone watching and everyone in the room. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Councilman Munkoff-Swain, one more comment, and I'll do a quick wrap-up and we can move on. Sam, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks. So on the pay-as-you-go piece, we talked about it yesterday and recognizing you're planning to bring that back. We're still contributing $900,000 in pay-as-you-go in this budget, right? Leaving $312,000 that's not there. So if everything proceeds as you project and plan, then basically that $312,000 would shift over into a reserve fund. Is that effectively what I heard yesterday?
So through the mayor to the councillor, so in that regard, we've already committed $150,000 of that 312 through the motion yesterday. So there isn't a large balance left, and it's about protecting the integrity of the future contributions into future budget cycles, which is the harder part to claw back, as Councillor Telebus spoke to. So that's the position of, we could theoretically spend on one time that contribution or the excess balance for this year, but it's about maintaining the future year's contributions in the budget.
Yeah, in summary, leave them both alone, I think is the message.
I can't say that. Do whatever you'd like,
That's
but
how
I would recommend that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Between the lines, this is what he's basically saying. Thanks, Councillor McCook, you have the floor, Kat.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be quick. I think Councillor Munkoff-Swain and Councillor Telebus kind of covered a lot of my thoughts as well. Since last year, my focus has kind of been on reserves, and I've been anxiously awaiting that reserve update. So for myself, I agree. I think this just pushes things down the road, and while it's I appreciate you bringing it up and the spirit of why you brought it forward, but I think it doesn't set up our city for the long-term sustainability. And for myself, that's always something that I'm kind of focused on, and not making the decisions right now in the moment for right now, but also for the longevity and sustainability for our community. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. A couple quick more comments. Councillor Penrod, followed by Councillor Barnhart. Phil, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mayor. All that I would add to the conversation, I think, is what other folks have spoken to, I think would be my general underlying rule, but just would want to add to, like a conversation we had in the last budget. Sometimes these are balancing. I think the conversation was around projected revenue and growth in revenue, right? Is oftentimes, to Jay's point yesterday, if we're being responsible, we're being real conservative on our revenue and maybe overestimating our expenses just so that we have some margin to deal with surprises. So there is always a kind of balancing risk and reward in these conversations. And so I can imagine a scenario where administration and council are aware of something coming down the pipe that could be an opportunity to reinvest or kind of right-size things. It's not necessarily the case this year, but I could imagine that. So I would just say it wouldn't be for me a hard and fast rule in every budget. We've got to go case by case based on what we know. Based on what we know this year, I'd be in alignment with my fellow councillors.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barnard, followed by Councillor Van Newkirk. Kathy, you have the floor.
So it's not often me that goes this way, but I'm not in sync here. I really do think that this is an unusual year, and that's when I think of our reserves as being there to help us. The RCMP contract keeps coming to mind as something that we're paying for this year that we may not be paying for. It's such a big hit in future years. So I appreciate you bringing it forward, Mayor. I don't know if I'm going to stand alone in support of your motion, but I'm prepared to do that. Just giving it one more shot here in terms of to the administration. Is it possible for how can I put this? So in the capital reserves, when I look at what's on the page, there are other sources of revenue for some of those. I mean, there could be grants, there could be debt, other ways in which we can fund something that comes up that's unusual. I'm not a fan of getting our reserves down to zero. Don't get me wrong, but I do really think that when it comes to our operating budget and what's pushing our costs up, the financial stabilization fund has helped us out in the past. So I just don't see anywhere else to go right now other than to cut service levels even further than we know are going to be impacted already. So could you speak to it again in terms of the difference between the operating and the capital reserves, and if council could identify one of those versus the other, and it might be less risk for us?
Through the mayor to the councillor. So the two operating reserves that we have, so stabilization and planning, are below optimal balance, and one is even in the hole slightly at the moment. The majority of our capital program is funded from reserves. And capital also has inflation, and actually the capital inflation is significantly higher over the last 4 or 5 years. The BCPI index has been 30% over the last 4 years as we came out of COVID. There was a 12% and a 9% in back-to-back years. And that is directly impacting our capital purchases. Capital is funded directly from reserve. It's on an operating item. And the only way to be able to accommodate those capital inflation growths is by corresponding reserve transfer increases at the same time. As our $70,000 truck or $52,000, whoever you're buying it from, grows to 70 and 90 and so on and so forth. If we're not putting more, more capital dollars away into reserve, we're not be able to buy as many things as we need to continue. So service will degrade in a different manner. So rather than an operating function, we're no longer going to be able to do the park maintenance or road maintenance or anything like that because we don't have the capital infrastructure to support the service now at the same time. So that's why I'm a little bit territorial about the reserves, because I know that is usually one of the, people don't see the direct correlation between reserve transfers and services. They see operations and services, and there's not that correlation. They just think that reserves is just your savings account, and well, we don't need to put money away for savings, but it's actually a funding source for our capital programs, which directly provide service. And so that's where I try to protect and keep that going.
I'm fighting a losing battle, I know that. Having been in operations all my life and service delivery, I've often thought, gee, I wish I had capital, because that's something I could, make a good case for with reserves. But when it comes to operating, there's just nowhere to go. And so that's my dilemma.
to your point, as far as the other funding sources, so again, we leverage grants wherever possible to protect our own funds.
It's just not enough
And
of
then
them.
debt is often an intergenerational equity tool, which is for usually significant capital so that people pay over the life of the asset and not for the smaller ticket items. We would never take debt out on a truck, for example. It would be bigger ticket items. So those other levers aren't available or have already been used.
I'll say it again, and I know, I wish the province would give us more money to operate, because that's what we're fighting. We're fighting, again, a losing battle of trying to find money from the people that need the service, and it's real hard to do, so we gave it a shot, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate that. Councillor Van Nieuwkerk, a comment, and then I'll do a quick wrap-up, and we can move on this issue. Steve, you have the floor.
Yeah, you bet. The budget process gets down to some horse trading at some point, so I just want to try an idea here, second on Mr. Boychuk. So the motion forward is 283. Councillor Barnhart just, asked the question on operating versus capital. You alluded to the fact that a lot of the capital projects that are proposed are pulling out of the capital reserves. So one of the things that I see there that I wanted to have a discussion on later anyways is the insulation in the CCBCC. So if we didn't fund that for 200K, would that 200K align with the 283 and we'd be only net 283? If that scenario came to life, do those funding pools align, and would that math work out?
Jay?
Sorry, Councillor, could you repeat the scenario again? I didn't quite catch all of it.
So CCBCC in capital is proposed at 200K right now. And that's to put the insulation in between the floors. So if we didn't do that and we reduced the 283 into reserve here, we would only be net 83, not going into reserves, because we'd offset it with that 200 grand, because the 200 grand would already be worked into this reserve page, I think. Is that correct?
So through the mayor to the councillor, so no, the actual ramifications in this year would be 83,000, but then we would lose 283,000 in next year's budget and 203 the year after and after and after. So by reducing the tax rate this year by that amount, even though we're swapping out the one-time cash, because that's what that would be, we'd not do a capital project and so therefore not spend the money, but the contribution in future years would disappear, which is the larger impact.
You're good, Steve?
Okay. Yeah, I'll be okay for now. I'm just thinking about that.
Thank you. One last quick comment then, Sam, and I'll go to the one last wrap-up.
Yeah, this is definitely not on your motion. It's about the conversation that we just had. Because it does speak, and we could probably get there on capital, but on that capital budget, it says that where Steve is going is that we're contributing $4.7 million into reserves, $4.77 million into reserves. So if we didn't do the CCB sound dampening project, we would then only be contributing $4.75 million. So that nets off. That means that we're contributing less into reserves. Therefore, we're quote unquote saving $200,000 in the operating budget. Is that not right?
You are this year, but it's also dropping the contribution down next year as well. So that'd be net zero on the reserve position this year, but future contributions would be less.
Yeah, but okay, we'll get to it in the, yeah.
Capital.
I'm with you, Steve. We'll fight the good fight, brother.
Yeah. I know where you're going, but I think it's a capital discussion for sure, so.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Somebody know.
Councillor. Thank you, Councillor. Appreciate Council's feedback. My objective, now that we had this conversation, was to make sure that we, after the budget is done, can say, do we turn every stone over, make every effort we possibly can to make informed decisions on the budget? I'm voting against my own motion, because we can do that. The idea is bring a motion forward to have it discussed. You can vote for your, if you want, or against it. I will vote against my own motion. I do agree with everything said about reserves, but the discussion was robust and informative to our members of the public, and we can say with pride that we looked at every possibility and made informed decisions based on what's best for us long term. And the explanation by my fellow councillors and Jay does initiate the long term. I do appreciate your comments, Councillor, but I do think from longest perspective, I'm a big fan of strong, solid reserves, and we've been doing that for years now. So with that, I'm done talking about it. So would you please initiate the vote process? There we go. It's not up here. There we are. Councilman Newkirk, how do you vote?
Opposed.
Thank you. That motion is defeated. 6-1, Councillor Barnhart in favor, the balance of us in opposition. Thank you, Council. I appreciate the discussion, and it was well done. I do have another motion here. Will operating budget be amended by adding a one-time funding in the amount of $12,000 for a Remembrance Day crosswalk as a project to be funded from pay-as-you-go. I'll speak to my own motion here. So, Council, I did forward a picture of a Remembrance crosswalk in Cochrane. We'll try to put the picture on the screen for those who are viewing at home, as well as people in the room who haven't seen it yet. I thought this was supposed to be a capital item, but apparently I talked to Finance today, and it is actually an operating budget. So I thought it was going to be capital. That's where we're having it now. So it is simply a red and white crosswalk with "Lest We Forget" across on each end with a symbol of a soldier there. It conforms to the Legion's concern not having crosswalks with poppies on them and people driving on poppies. That's why they did it this way. I know we're looking at potentially doing a cenotaph down the road, but we do have a very strong Remembrance Day service at our rec center, and I think a crosswalk in the area would be a nice gesture. So I got the pricing from Mayor Ganung in Cochrane. That's supposed to last approximately 10 years. It's been installed earlier this spring. So with that, it's a simple idea. Again, I thought it was supposed to be capital, but it is actually an operating expense. I wasn't expecting that. So the $12,000 would be 0.05% change to our tally. So we're at 5.41 to be 5.402 or something. If this motion were to pass, Jay?
So through the mayor, so this would, or to the mayor, this would have a net impact because it would be funded from pay-as-you-go and not from.
Sorry, you said pay-as-you-go. I forgot. Thank you for clarifying. It would not affect the tax levy at all. I thought it was going to, but it's not. So thank you for clarifying that. With that, I'll open it to questions. Oh, Mr. Lewecki, give me a second to give you a microphone here. Your microphone's on.
To the mayor, I just wanted to make a clarification. Our current crosswalks that we paint would never last 10 years. So I don't know what special technology they might use on this, but if we're simply painting, this would probably need to be done annually. Unless I'm missing something, I can't see how this would last 10 years.
That's I take that comment as intended, as good advice. I did talk to the mayor, and that's what they got down there. So I didn't ask for a lot of details from that. I wouldn't want to spend $12,000 every year. That would be, because we don't spend that now on our other side of us that we do. So should the motion pass and we find out after the fact that it's going to be an annual thing, can we simply not do it down the road or bring it back out again? That's a valid point. I didn't think of that. I thought what Cochrane told us would be a valid concern. Jay?
So if we deemed that the cost was an annual nature, we didn't want to do it, we could just not execute it, and the dollars would end up in surplus into the next year.
Okay, so we wouldn't be bound by it, because my intention is not to be annual, to be what I was informed that Cochrane had agreed to their installation this past spring. Okay, thank you. Councilor Telebus, Nathan, you have the floor.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate you bringing this forward. Obviously, any chance and opportunity that we can get to recognize fallen soldiers and anyone that protects us, with law enforcement included as well, is important. My only concern with this is as discussed, potentially how short-term it may be and the cost associated with it. So with that being said, I would much rather see those funds go to a cenotaph or something a little more permanent. So for that reason, I would be against it, but fully support the idea, and I thank you for bringing it forward.
Appreciate that. Councilor Penrod.
Thanks, Mayor, and appreciate the jumping in, Mr. Lewicki, with a comment. That was actually going to be my first question. My second and follow-up question is the rainbow crosswalks that we paint in 2 locations in the city. What is the annual cost for those? Because I understood that it is an annual cost, right? So I guess where I'm going with this is maybe the cost isn't $12,000. Like, I don't think any of us would consider $12,000 a year prudent, but maybe if we use the same paint and the same technology, it's a different cost.
Mr. Lewecki?
Through the mayor to Councillor Penrod, I did confirm that 12,000 should be able to paint this crosswalk one time. Now, there might be different products that have it last longer, but at this point, the way we are currently doing our crosswalks with our current Pride crosswalk configuration, it's a little hard to compare. Obviously, we haven't priced out this configuration. The Pride crosswalks have, like, I don't know, don't quote me, 9 colors, 10 colors in them. So that's a lot of extra effort. I think we're doing about 15,000 per for those annually. And I mean, as you see, you drive down 50th Street, you will notice by spring it will be mostly gone or faded and degraded significantly. So 12,000 should do this with the, there's only, looks like 3 colors in there. So I've confirmed that that should be adequate for an annual at one location, one paint, one application.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it would be a project that I'd like to support. I think we just need a bit more information on it. And I think that if the intention is to fund it through pay-as-you-go, it's not necessarily something that we ultimately have to decide at budget. We could do it as a supplemental piece through the year. It would seem to me that we have a fair amount of time before next November.
Madam Clerk, could we do it as a supplemental end of day tomorrow or end of day tonight, hopefully? I'm prepared to withdraw the motion and entertain it at that time, if that works.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, we can prepare a motion for supplemental to bring a report back on that.
Great. I'll withdraw the motion and we'll do it as supplemental and we'll go from that point forward. Thank you. All right. Next on our page 12, going down, there's no more motions that I'm aware of for operating at this time. So next is the RCMP contract increase on page 12 at the bottom. It does show, my reading glasses here, 530 all calculated. At this time, discussion from members of council. I believe Councilor Monkoff-Swain has a comment on this particular item. So Sam, I'll give the floor to you at this time.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just first off, what happens if we don't pay this? Not suggesting we will, I'm just asking the question before Edmund, I saw their looks back there.
CEO Schwartz.
Like any other contract, then we're in breach.
Right. So the next question is around, 17 members of the RCMP here. They're not always fully staffed, right? So does this contract increase, is that based on all 17 being here at all times? Could you just speak to that?
CEO, Ms. O'Neill.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Monkoff-Swain. No, this would only include the forecasted member utilization. So we forecasted with the RCMP 14 members out of 17. So this only covers the 14.
Perfect. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further, hang on. Councillor Telebus, you had yours, you're done? Okay. Seeing no further questions, members of council. Steve, anything from you on this topic? I can't see you, of course.
No, all good, Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Telebus? Yeah, I'll come back to you. Nathan, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just looking for clarity for some of the unfunded items that potentially fall operating. Do we have to cover that previously, or will we go to the unfunded items at the end to discuss in detail?
Sorry, can you say that again? I only caught part of that, sorry. I was
Yeah,
looking
so
at
some
my
of the
screen.
unfunded items, if they fall under operating, do we have to present that prior to moving on? Or will we go over some of the unfunded items at the end, like towards the end of the budget here?
I believe, Madam Clerk, we should probably tackle any unfunded operating items at this time, is my understanding.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we should, anything to do with operating, even if it is in unfunded, should be dealt with now.
Yeah, okay. So we no further comments on the RCMP before I believe we go into potentially unfunded operating items? Okay, with that, I believe then we can move then, we have completed page 12 as what's here now, so we can then move into operating unfunded, and I'll begin with you, Councilor Telebas, so you have something in mind. So Nathan, you have the floor.
Perfect. Thank you. I will just wait for a motion.
Yeah.
It's already done.
I thought it would. That'd be very much fun. Thanks for adjusting. Move on. Have the floor. Right.
Clerk, am I able to start with the other motion?
This is from yesterday, correct, Nathan?
Not yet, but will be.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. This is getting interesting. All right.
Surprises, I love surprises.
Okay, here we go. Give you a second, Madam Clerk, to bring up the right one. The music thing? Yeah. But not Andrew next, singing. Madam Clerk, need a short break? Okay, we'll take a short break and be back in hopefully 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll continue with our meeting. If you want an environmental break, now is a really good time.